What is going on, my dudes and dudettes? Showing you that's a Serpentarium. So today we're just going to be doing a little video about ball pythons versus rosy boas. So this is obviously a ball python. In case you didn't know, you probably did. Full marks for you. So this is actually a piebald ball python. He's a male. Okay, I'm just trying to show his pattern off a little bit there. And that's you know, that's sort of going to segue me into this video. What you prefer in a snake is going to depend on what you prefer out of these two snakes. They're very different snakes. It's not really going to be many people comparing the two. It's going to be mainly beginners, and they're thinking, oh, do I like this better, do I like that better, type of thing, if that makes sense. So that's, you know, who these videos are going to be. This video is going to be aimed at. And the first thing is, you know, I'm gonna talk about, since I've mentioned it already, is morphs. If you're someone that likes morphs, especially if you live in the UK, you're going to be better off with these guys, the ball pythons, because these have got a lot more morphs than the rosies. The rosies do have morphs. They've got albino and etheristic and stuff like that, but most of these morphs are not available in the UK. They are available in the States, but they're not over here, so that might be something to factor in. They do have localities available in the UK. You know, you've got lots of different colour phases and stuff like that to have. But the ball pythons, they've got a lot more as far as colour. This guy, he's about 3 years old, and this is a small adult male, really. He's the smallest male I've certainly got, and he's not underweight at all. You can see he's got good girth on him. His stomach is actually bigger than his head. He's got a really little head. So ball pythons are a lot bigger than rosies. He's bigger than any of my rosies for sure, and he's, you know, a really small example of a ball python. So if you want something that's a little bit bigger, I would probably go with the ball pythons, to be honest with you. You find that they're a lot more chunky. They're quite a bit longer as well, and they're just more substantial to hold and handle. These ball pythons, obviously they've got quite picky humidity requirements, especially compared to something as hardy as a rosy boa. We've got to be quite exact for the humidity. That might be a big deal for some people, it might not be for others. But with something like a ball python, you've got to keep track of it, especially when it's in shed. You don't want it too wet in there. You don't want the floor to be wet and stuff like that. But you don't want it to be too dry, because then in one shed you could get issues with this respiratory tract if it's either too dry or too wet as well. So that's something to bear in mind. Where are you going, but he's having a look at the crocodile. So yeah, that is something you do need to bear in mind with the two species. Rosy boas, on the other hand, what I found is obviously going to be dependent on where you live. But what I found with humidity is, as long as they've got a water bowl, and sometimes, you know, they shed without even a water bowl in there. But as long as you've got a water bowl in there, I don't have any issues with shedding. So that's pretty good, especially if you're a beginner. So going on to temperature and stuff like that, these guys need it quite a bit warmer really than a rosy, being from Africa. So these need a hot spot of somewhere between 88 and 92. That's pretty much ideal. And then a cool end of around about 80, give or take 4 or 5 degrees, something like that. You don't want it to, you know, swing too much from 80. As long as they can be warm and cool down, that's alright. And then something like the rosy, then you're gonna want a hot spot of somewhere between 86 and 90, and then a cool end can be down to maybe 75, something like that, 70. They're a lot more tolerant to the cold. Rosies can brumate as well in the winter, which you can brumate them at about 15 degrees Celsius, which is, what's that, it's about 55-60 degree Fahrenheit, something like that. So they're a lot more hardy as far as temperature. You would never dream of putting something like this down to that temperature for any sort of time. But the Rosies, they you know, they are hardier with the temperatures and the humidity and stuff like that. As far as handling goes, to be honest, I find ball pythons better to handle for the most part. They're a lot more substantial, as we spoke about earlier. They tend to be, they're both slow moving snakes, which is nice, but they're a lot more substantial, and I find ball pythons are a lot less likely to bite. So if you're a newbie, that is something to bear in mind. Rosies, they're not big aggressive snakes or anything like that. They're not aggressive. What they tend to sometimes do is they sort of open their mouth and try to swallow you. It's quite cute to watch, to be fair. But if you're a newbie, you know, that might be quite off-putting, because sometimes as well, if they catch you right, it can be a little bit painful. It's not, you know, a big deal or anything, but it can be a little bit painful, and that is something you do need to think about when you get in the two. If you get one that's tame from the breeder though, and you keep handling it, you shouldn't have any issues. But these guys really, you know, these are a lot better for handling, in my opinion. Right, so this is a rosy boa. This is actually a male Mexican rosy boa. So you can see he's got a lovely sort of cream off-white colour with the black then in contrast, okay? Really nice looking snake. He's a nice example, you can see, for handling, because this is normally what most rosy boas are like to handle. They're quite slow. You never really get a fast rosy. Just like the ball pythons, they are quite slow moving. This is an adult male. So that's as big as a male is going to get. The females will get a little bit bigger than this, but it's not a big snake, so it's great if you're living in something like an apartment or something like that. Or maybe, you know, your parents' house still, or whatever the case may be, and they don't want, you know, a bigger enclosure. Something like this can live in quite a small tank, which is great, really. So handling, you can see he's not giving me any trouble here whatsoever at the moment. These guys, obviously, because they're a lot smaller as well, they don't need as much to eat, which is great. You know, you're talking probably, as far as the housing and the feeding costs go, you know, and the cost of actually keeping the snake, you're probably talking about the third of the price really to keep one of these compared to keeping a ball python. The cost of actually buying the animal will depend. In the UK, there's not many of them about, so you've sort of got to buy them where you can, type of thing. In America and in other places of the world, you're going to have a lot more choice of where you can buy them from, and therefore then there'll be a bigger sort of price range then, if that makes much sense. But they're not expensive animals at all, which is great, really, because, you know, someone that wants to get into snakes can pick one up. And an animal like this, a rosy boa, these will live, well, I think the record is 47 years or something like that for a rosy. It's about 45 for a royal. So they're very long-lived animals when they're taken care of properly. You can expect either to live over 20 years indefinitely, as long as you're looking after it as you should. So they're very long-lived, and really, you know, that sort of massively offsets whatever you pay for up front, because, you know, in the long term you're going to spend more on food anyway, but more importantly, you're going to get an awful lot of enjoyment out of an animal like this, or a ball python, over the course of 20, 25, 30 years. You're going to have it as a pet, which I think is pretty amazing. So just talking about you know, the longevity of the snakes and stuff like that, we'll go on to feeding, because I did briefly mention that just now. So with feeding, obviously I said these guys are going to be cheaper, but which is true for sure. But they're a lot better eaters and they're a lot more consistent eaters than the royal pythons, or ball pythons as we call them in America. Yeah, they're a lot more consistent. Very rarely do these guys go off food. They will go off food now and again, sometimes, especially the males. As an adult, you really shouldn't feed it as much as it wants to be fed, because it is going to get fat very quickly. They're greedy little buggers. Whereas royals, they will go off feed every now and again. I've had a royal go off food for 9 months, which is fine. It didn't really bother me, but I've got a few snakes here, so I could just keep an eye on it, track when I wanted to eat, and then feed it. Obviously I was watching its body condition. I think it only lost something like 5% of its body weight, or something ridiculously low like that. But if you've got one snake, that's gonna quite upset you, I would think. If a snake goes off food for months and months and months. And not only that as well, you're going to waste a lot of money on rats if you're buying a rat every week and throwing it out. So that's something to keep in mind as well. These rosies, as far as feeding when they're adults, something like this would probably take like a medium mouse every other week, and a female then would take a large mouse every other week, depending on the particular size. Something like a royal, a male will maybe take an XL mouse every week, and then sometimes you're gonna want to double that up, or maybe, you know, feed something like a rat, but not all of them take rats. Or you could feed them an African soft fur of an appropriate size as well. And then a female, you're gonna feed her probably a medium rat every week, for, you know, most of the year. Or maybe a small rat if it's a smaller female. But certainly, you know, the size of the prey items for these is going to be a lot less, which is good or bad. You know, it depends on what you think. So earlier on I spoke about the shedding, and something I think that's really cool about these rosies is obviously they shed a normal of humidity, but also water isn't actually, if you keep it with water, that's fine, that's great. I keep all mine with water now. I didn't before though. I had a rosie for 1.5 years before I give it any water, believe it or not, and it's completely fine. The reason why I did that is because I've heard that rosies can have problems with regurgitation if they eat and then have water. And I also know that if there's water in the tank, that increases the humidity, and if it tips the water over, that's going to increase the humidity even more. So I just made the decision to not keep it with water and see how it went. I know other people that do that as well, and it was fine. But now I keep them with water, and it's also fine. So, you know, pick and choose what you want to do there. If you do buy a rosie and it regurgitates its meal, it could be down to the water. So what you want to do then is a day before you feed it, take the water out, and then put it back in 2 days after it's eaten, and you shouldn't have any problems with that. And that's what I'm going to do if it ever comes up in my rosie collection. With royals, you don't need to worry about anything like that. Just make sure they've got a big enough water bowl to soak in, and they're going to be happy as Larry. Hi buddy. They're going to be happy as Larry. And then you can just crack on with your snake keeping career. But yeah, 2 seconds. I'll show you some colour phases of both the rosies and the royals. You've probably seen lots of colour phases of royals elsewhere, so I'm mostly going to be concentrating on the rosy colour phase, and then we're just going to have a little debrief. Right, so this is a little sub-adult albino coastal rosy boa. A gorgeous little snake, to be honest. Really nice, and you can see there, this isn't a big tub actually. It's quite a small tub. Sorry about the mess on the floor. I've been cleaning my snakes today. But yeah, this isn't a big tub. This is about the size of a V35 or a 12-litre tub.